Hello folks, I'm Smig, and this is what hopefully will be the first in a series of videos where I explore realism in video games. In this one, I'm going to take a look at the rapier in Dark Souls 1. Now before we get into the actual sword that we see here, and I also have this one, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about rapiers in general. So rapiers were predominantly a civilian weapon. They were also used in the battlefield, but predominantly they were used for self-defense by civilians and also for dueling. Rapiers usually had very long blades and thin blades as well. Now, many people think that rapiers could not cut. That is not true. Rapiers could definitely cut, at least the majority of them. And cuts are part of the repertoire of a rapier. Rapiers were also known for having very sophisticated guards. So the guard is the bit of metal that is between the handle and the blade. That guard usually protected the hand quite well. And yeah, I guess that's it. That's it on rapiers. It's important to understand, though, that the word rapier was used to describe many kinds of weapons. Longer, shorter, all different sizes with all different kinds of features. So there was no standard for what a rapier was or is nowadays. But usually we think of rapiers as those weapons that had longer blades, thinner blades, dedicated towards the thrust with sophisticated guards. Oh, also one-handed weapons. Which, by the way, let me just address something before we get into the nitty-gritty. This weapon has what seems to be a two-handed grip. I'm going to ignore that because I think that's just my suspicion. I think that comes from the game design. That is something that comes upstream, and I don't think you could design the weapons without having that into account. And this is because in Dark Souls you can equip any weapon in one hand or in two hands. So for this animation to make sense with all the weapons, even though some of these weapons were not meant to be used in two hands, they needed to extend the grip for this to make sense. So I'm not going to, I'm going to ignore that. Let's just think of this as a one-handed weapon, even though the hilt is longer than it should be. And let's take a look at it in detail. Is this a rapier? Possibly. This is a difficult question to answer, not only because obviously this is not a historical weapon. It's in Dark Souls, it's not in Earth, so we can't go by when was it found, where was it found, that kind of stuff. Just looking at it, the word rapier was applied to so many swords that I guess we have to say that it qualifies, but it's not a good example of a rapier, and I think this is the question that we should focus on, and not the question of whether it is a rapier. If you were to show me this weapon in isolation without the name, I might call it a side sword, to be honest. I don't know if I would call it a rapier, but you could probably find rapiers like this. It's possible. So I'm not going to really focus on that. Let's look at, is this a good example of a rapier? And I would think that the answer there is no. And there are a few reasons for that. One of them, and I guess the main one, is the length of the blade. It's just a little on the shorter side. This is not to say that rapiers did not exist with this length, but if you were to make a rapier in your video game, you might want it to actually capture the essence of the weapon. And I think part of the essence of what a rapier is a long blade, long thin blade. Now this isn't necessarily a short blade, but it's not really a blade that screams rapier, which is unfortunate. Also, the guard is sophisticated. It has more than the cross guard. The cross guard is those two pieces of metal. They're called quillons that are perpendicular to the blade. So anything more than that is, you know, on side sword territory or rapier territory. Just seems like it's missing something. I think the main thing it's missing is a knuckle bow, but it probably should have more sophisticated guards. That would make it look more like a rapier. This is a little on a simpler side, which makes it look less like a rapier. So, is this a good example of the rapier? Well, not really. I think this is an underwhelming example of a rapier, if we can classify it as a rapier. Just for comparison, let's just look at Ricard's rapier. Now, this blade does look more like a rapier. And maybe we can measure it with the railing over here, or maybe this thing. Let's see if we can... See that reference over there? Look at that. That's a significant difference in size. And it makes a world of a difference, because if you look at it, just from a distance, it does look like a rapier. It makes a huge difference, that extra size. This is a little on a shorter size. It's barely a rapier, I guess. But I wouldn't say this is a good example. If I were to make a rapier in a video game, I would really want it to look obviously like a rapier. I would want it to scream rapier. This doesn't really do it. Now, the Ricard's rapier, it's interesting because it fixes some of those issues, but then it introduces another. Although part of the issue that it introduces, it might be the same kind of problem as we had with two-handed grip. Now, the blade length seems good. That's much more like a rapier. But the hilt, oh my god, why is it so big? Why is it so disproportionate? It doesn't even look like it belongs with that blade. It's just so big. Look at that. Now, there are a few issues from this. Now, one of them, the most obvious one I think, is the knuckle bow, which is very, very wide. So the knuckle bow is that piece of metal that curves around the knuckles. That's obviously supposed to protect your knuckles. It's really, really wide. Now, the reason might be also game design. It might be that because they don't know what kind of gloves you're wearing, and some gloves can be kind of big, to avoid having clipping issues where the geometry of the glove clips the sword, they might have to go that wide. So that might be it. So I'm not going to judge it that harshly because of that. It might just be game design. But it's still, I mean, it looks so silly. It just looks so silly to have that. I would rather they don't have it, if that's how they're going to do it, because that's just silly. The other problem that I have with this is, so maybe I'll have to add some images, because this is hard to explain, but there are those rings. I'm not talking about the side rings over there, which are also quite big, unnecessarily big, which adds a lot of weight to the weapon in an unnecessary way. Adding weight to the blade can deliver harder blows, but here, not really. Just makes it less wieldy. But those side rings, not this. Okay, so not these rings that we're looking through right now. There are these rings on the side. these rings on the side, the purpose of these rings is so that you can put your finger through them. And this is actually how you're supposed to use a rapier. You're supposed to have your finger go over the crossguard and through that ring over there. Now, as you can see, there's no way to do it unless you have a really long finger. But there's really no way to do it. I guess you could make some kind of lore reason for this. Like this was used by someone with a giant hand. That could be it. But then you'd need a longer blade for that, because then the blade would be, I mean, just ridiculously short if that were the case. But anyway, the reason why I would rate this poorly in terms of realism is not just that it's unproportional, it's also that the functionality is completely compromised. You can't use this like a rapier. You can't use this with a rapier grip. It would be not just unwieldy, but you couldn't even take advantage of the features of the hilt. So, you know, it looks way better in terms of the blade length. It looks like a rapier. If you were to show me this weapon without any name, I would call it a rapier. Unlike this one, where I would be a little confused. Maybe I wouldn't call it a rapier, but yeah, this one screams rapier. It's just that it would be very dysfunctional as a rapier, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say on this. There's also another sword called a rapier, but it doesn't look anything like a rapier. It's Velka's rapier. Well, I guess the blade length is okay. It's a little, I guess it should taper more to look more like a rapier. And also, the guard is a simple guard. I mean, it's sophisticated from a cosmetic perspective, but in terms of its features, it's just a crossguard. There's nothing else to it. Also, you can also not use this as a rapier, just like Ricard's rapier, because you can't shoot your finger over the guard. In fact, if that guard on top were a little bit higher, you actually could do it, but well, no, you couldn't, because where the hand sits, it's too far down. So this is something that you could not use as a rapier either. It doesn't even look like a rapier, so yeah, I guess it's a rapier because they gave it a rapier moveset. That's all. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say on this. If you like this kind of content, then let me know. Like and comment can help me guide my content. So yeah, see you guys next time. Bye.